Welcome everyone to PARC Forum. This is our 9th talk in our special speaker series on Going Beyond Web 2.0, the power of the web for connecting people, collaboratively co-creating knowledge, enabling organizations to effectively use social computing tools, build communities, and more. The first 4 talks in this series, Social Tech's Ross Mayfield on how all things Web 2.0 are made of people, Garrett Camp on the Stumble Upon Web Discovery System, Charlene Leah Forrester on strategies for winning in a world transformed by social technologies, and Guy Kawasaki on the numbers of launching a web-based business are already available online. The other talks in this series, including Bernardo Huberman on social dynamics in the age of the web, BJ Fogg and colleagues on Facebook applications and mass interpersonal persuasion, Fernanda Villegas and Martin Wattenberg on democratizing visualizations, and Premal Shah of Kiva.org on a transparent web-based microfinance system will be available online later. We'll let you know in the next forum when that's going to be, but they should be posted soon. Today's talk will also be available there. Next week's speaker is Katie Delahaye Payne of the Measurement Standard, who will address some of the questions a few of you series regulars have asked about ways to measure the effectiveness of a new ROI in a Web 2.0 world. So to view these talks, sign up for forum announcements, or learn more about PARC Forum, please visit www.parc.com/forums, F-O-R-U-M-S. So, but now, without further delay, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Andrew McAfee of Harvard Business School. As many of you know, we've tried to represent different viewpoints in this speaker series, covering various technologies, approaches, and business models. We're thrilled to include Andrew's perspectives on the hotly discussed topic of Enterprise 2.0. So let me tell you a little bit more about our speaker. Andrew McAfee joined the faculty of Harvard Business School in 1998. His research investigates how managers can most effectively select, implement, and use IT to achieve business goals. His current research falls into 2 categories: an exploration of how Web 2.0 technologies can be used within the enterprise and what their impact is likely to be, and a study of IT's impact over time on the structure of US industries and the nature of competition within them. Prior to HBS, Andrew worked as a consultant in operations management, advising clients in a range of industries, including aerospace, consumer electronics, white goods, and OEM electronics. Andrew McAfee was awarded a doctorate in business administration at HBS in 1999. He also holds dual MS degrees in mechanical engineering and management from MIT as a Leaders for Manufacturing Fellow, and BS degrees in mechanical engineering and in humanities from MIT. So now, without further delay, let's welcome our speaker. Thanks.
Thanks very much. When I showed up here this afternoon, the first thing that Sonal did was apologize for the weather. For someone who just got off a plane from Boston, honestly, no apology necessary. I want to talk about some work that I've been doing for the past 2 years on a topic that I call Enterprise 2.0, which I'll define in a little bit. I got started on this work because my interest has always been the impact of information technology on companies and how they perform and how they compete. And I got started studying these large, fairly monolithic, fairly heavy enterprise systems made by SAP and Oracle and JD Edwards and all of those. And I tried to understand what their impact was on businesses. And I always try to explain things from a general management perspective, not a CIO's perspective. And the verb that I found myself using over and over again to describe these technologies was impose. And as I looked around, what these technologies were very good at is letting management teams impose their will across organizations, to impose a new set of business processes, in some cases even a new organizational model. And I just found myself using that verb over and over again. I got fairly comfortable with that phenomenon, I think. And a couple years ago, my colleagues started to say to me, Andy, you sound a bit like a broken record. Is there any other interesting story with technology in business these days? Are we using technology to do anything else for businesses that might be of interest? And I thought that was a great question. And at about the same time, I started to hear this 2.0 suffix being applied to everything. First of all, Web 2.0 was coined by Tim O'Reilly, I believe, in 2004. And when I first heard about it, my skepticism just kicked in like crazy. And I thought that this was just another example of the technology industries putting old wine in new bottles, which they're very, very good at doing. They're great at legitimate innovation, and they're great at talking about innovation, whether or not there's actually anything new going on. And I thought that 2.0 was just an example of the latter. And this is a 100% true story. I kept on hearing stories about Wikipedia, about this mass-produced, egalitarian, collaborative encyclopedia out there on the web, and I thought that this was really just not going to work because after some initial period, once a utopian experiment like this reaches some critical mass, all the bad guys show up and they start ruining it for everybody else. And you've seen this dysfunctional dynamic play out a couple different times. And I was pretty convinced that as Wikipedia got bigger and got all this attention in the press, that you go easily watch it fall apart or break down as the people of ill will showed up. So I fired up Wikipedia just to test my skepticism. And I thought that I would look at a couple things and walk away and tell all of my audiences that there was really nothing very interesting going on here. And I fired up the homepage of Wikipedia, and in all seriousness, the first thing that I typed into the Wikipedia search box was skinhead. Now, this is not a political statement, this haircut. And I knew nothing about skinheads. I knew just enough to know that there are basically two different flavors. There are the evil, nasty, vicious, racist skinheads, and there are people of exactly the opposite philosophy and temperament. They're a peace and love, everybody get along, let's play nice together skinheads. They dress very similarly, very small, different clues. But I thought that if there's any place where I can watch these two groups really not get along, it's going to be the single Wikipedia entry for skinhead. And what I'll watch is a flame war breakout, as opposed to anything that's valuable. And then I can walk away from Wikipedia and poo-poo it all I want. So the page fired up, and I looked up a half hour later, after having read the best encyclopedia entry about skinhead culture, fashion, music, history, demographics that I'd ever come across. It was extraordinarily well done. I looked up after a half an hour of that and I said, something interesting is really going on here. And what I want to talk about is what I think is interesting, or my explanation for the change dynamics and why 2.0 is not hype and is actually an appropriate suffix to add to things. My interest is always about a company trying to get more widgets out the door every day. I have an operations management background, so that's just how I look at things. You'll see that reflected in the material that I'll share. I think the 2.0 toolkit is a fantastic way to get more widgets out the door at the end of the day. And when I talk to my MBA students and executives at HBS, this is the gospel that I'm preaching these days. So I want to do a few things. First of all, offer my definition for Enterprise 2.0. Talk about the underlying trends. The web is, what, 1994, 1995 is typically when we date the birth of that. Why did we start hanging the 2.0 suffix in 2004, 2005? What changed? So I want to talk about the underlying trends that are leading to this discontinuity, and hopefully spend most of the time on bullets of 3 and 4, though. First of all, a way to frame the benefits to a very pragmatic business person of Enterprise 2.0. When I talk about these technologies and about the neat things you can do, the most common response I hear back from hard-headed business people is, that's fine, that's great, I see my kids doing this kind of stuff. Help me understand how this is going to be beneficial for my business. Why would I want to deploy these things internally? It's cool is not enough of a reason. So I want to talk about a way to frame the benefits. And then finally, I think that this is actually going to be very difficult for most companies to do, and I want to talk about why that is. I think that even if a lot of companies that I'm familiar with make sincere efforts to deploy this toolkit, a lot of them are just not going to be successful at throwing out the new technologies and actually changing the way people use them and change the way they collaborate with each other. And then make a couple of concluding remarks and open it up for discussion after that for a little bit. This is my definition of Enterprise 2.0. I'm going to assume the whole room is literate, so I'm not going to read that off. I hate it when presenters do that. But I want to stress a couple things. First of all, for me, Enterprise 2.0 is about how software is being used, as opposed to how it's being developed, open source, how it's being delivered, software as a service. These are all fantastic trends, very interesting in their own right. But what I'm focused on are the different use cases for technology these days. Some people want to take Enterprise 2.0 and use it as shorthand for all the cool stuff that's happening with technology behind the firewall these days. I push back fairly hard against that. And in the middle of this definition is the phrase an emergent social software platform, which for me is the key to understanding what's going on. And I want to unpack that phrase a little bit. When you hear about Enterprise 2.0, these are the technologies that most people immediately mention. I think this is spot on, but I don't want to go technology by technology. So I'll show examples, but I don't want to run down a list here. In addition to these, there's usually a set of handmaiden technologies that also go along with this, having to do with tagging and linking and searching and things like that. But again, I don't want to make this a talk about a laundry list of technologies. I'd much rather talk about trends. Let me give away the punchline of this talk and of a lot of my work so far. I think that the 2.0 suffix is actually appropriate. The technologies and the approaches to collaboration and knowledge sharing built on top of the technologies are actually novel. They're not just incremental improvements to things that we were already doing. This is not just email a little bit better, knowledge management a little bit better, groupware a little bit better. There's something different going on. I want to talk about what that is. The reason that my business audiences back east should be excited about this is that I think the new tools and approaches actually enable more than an incremental improvement in things that very pragmatic business people should care a lot about. Some of the deep rooted problems of business. I don't talk to any companies who think that they're completely happy with their innovation infrastructure or with their mechanisms for capturing and sharing knowledge throughout the organization. And you hear this phrase collective intelligence, which I used to think was just nonsense, right? I honestly believe that the IQ of a group was typically about half the IQ of the dumbest member of that group. And I loved this phrase that the only good thing ever to come out of a committee was the King James Bible. I don't believe these things anymore. I've seen too many examples of communities coming together and with just a few simple rules and some fairly simple technologies, generating content and generating results that are very, very impressive and better than an individual could do. I want to show a couple examples of that. So the reason we should be excited, or pragmatic business people should be excited, is that these technologies and the approaches built on top of them offer legitimate improvements in areas that they care, that these pragmatic business people care a great deal about. This is a very, very idiosyncratic and partial list of who's working on these and trying to deploy these tools and approaches. These are just companies with whom I have firsthand experience, so I can vouch for just about all of those. You see an interesting mix of services and manufacturing. You see a mix of old economy and new economy, and you see some very strange suspects in there. I've been doing a bit of work with the US intelligence community, for example, which has not typically been a hotbed of, free-flowing information sharing and emergent collaboration, not been the history. They're doing some fascinating things, which I'll talk a bit about, with technologies like their internal Intellipedia, blogging, very sincere use of the new toolkit, and I'm very optimistic about the results of that. When people have talked so far about the trends, about what's going on, they've tended to stress a couple things. First of all, that software is becoming more explicitly social. I wasn't here for Ross Mayfield's talk. He's a friend of mine. But I think that title is fantastic. Web 2.0 is about the people. Perfect. What we're doing with technology in this 2.0 world is not trying to get you and me out of the loop or automate us out of existence or even make us more productive as individuals. I think of all these technologies as ones where there's a person at every end of the wire, and the job of the wire and the networks to make those people interact in better ways. Second of all, when Tim O'Reilly talks about Web 2.0, he tends to stress network effects, the fact that these things get better as more people use them. Absolutely correct. I think that's really insightful. When I talk about Enterprise 2.0, I tend to stress the following three trends. First of all, the emergence of what I call free and easy platforms for communication. Second of all, one feature of all these platforms is that they try very hard not to impose structure on their users up front. There's just not a lot of upfront or ex-ante structure. And then finally, what we do instead of imposing structure up front is build in mechanisms to let structure emerge over time. So if you come back to these environments and look at them over time, they tend to get more densely structured, easier to navigate, easier to find stuff on, and it's a really remarkable property, not one that we were expecting. I want to dive in very quickly on each of these three trends and explain them in a bit more detail. To understand what I mean by free and easy platforms, I want to draw a quick distinction between two types of technology that we use for communication. The first is a channel, and email is my great example of a channel technology. Just point to point, there's a virtual pipe that opens up for the duration of the communication, and then it shuts down. There are times when that's exactly what we want. The problem, though, from an enterprise perspective, is that those point-to-point communications don't add up to anything. They don't persist. There's not usually a record of them. They're not consultable over time. And they don't accrete at all at the enterprise level. At least those are the ground rules with email right now. I think they're unlikely to change. So fantastic for private communication, but for anything else, they don't leave traces that we can harvest at all. A website is an example of a platform technology. Just very simply, it's an online repository of digital content where everyone who has access to the platform can look at all the stuff over time, and the stuff tends to accumulate over time. I want to draw a pretty sharp distinction between a classic 1.0 website or an intranet, where very few people had access to the platform to be able to add anything or change anything, and a blogosphere, or a collection of sites where it's very easy to add and to change content. And that sounds like a fairly small shift between a website, from a website to a blog, but actually I don't think it is. I was teaching an executive program at HBS a little while back, owners and presidents of small and medium-sized businesses, and I wanted them to just dip their toes in the 2.0 world. So I gave them an assignment one night. I said, start a blog. Here's blogger.com, here's typepad.com. Go start a blog. And I gave them an online form and said, type in the URL for your blog and send it back, and we'll look at a few in class the next day. And it's the only time that I ever faced an active insurrection in the classroom. And instead of actually doing the assignment, people used this form that I gave them to give me their reasons why they weren't going to do the assignment. And literally about 2/3 of the people used this online form to write back and essentially say, look, Andy, we appreciate what you're trying to do. I don't want to become a CIO for a living. I don't want to learn HTML. I've got a staff that does that. I'm way too busy. I don't want to be a geek. So thanks very much, but honestly, no blogging for me. And about 1/3 of the people actually tried to do the assignment. And you walk into class with one class plan, and you've got an insurrection instead of what you were planning to do. And all I could think to do was pick on one of the poor people who had actually done the assignment. And I said, would you walk us through what you did last night? And she said, yeah. I clicked on blogger.com like you said. I entered a username and a password. There's a choice of about 8 different blog templates. I picked one. A text box appeared. I typed a bunch of text to it, and I hit submit. And all of a sudden, I had a blog on the internet. I said, fantastic. How much time did that take you start to finish? She said, about 180 seconds. I said, did you have to give a credit card number? She said, no one wanted any money for me at this time. And I said, class, why would I give you such a stupid assignment? And there's that great dead silence, hear the crickets chirp in the room for a while. And one brave person raised his hand and said, to show us that it was a stupid assignment? Bang, we had a very good class from there. The point was they were stuck back in the world of thinking that to contribute to a platform, you have to have some level of expertise and some level of cash. And in the 2.0 world, that is just not the case. And any kind of content you want to contribute, a podcast, a still photograph, a video, text, multimedia, you can do all of those things with no expertise required, no technical chops, and no money required. So there's been this incredible democratization of content contribution on the internet, all of which is available on intranets as well. The thing to stress, though, about these new platforms is what they try pretty hard to do, in almost all the cases that I'm familiar with, what they try hard to do is not impose structure on their users. And I mean some fairly specific things by structure. This is a list of stuff that we're very comfortable using technology to do inside organizations. I was speaking at SAP this morning, and they are the masters of doing all of this with technology. They use technology to assign people into different roles, to give them differentiated privileges and identities based on those roles, to give them decision rights and take away decision rights, to have them walk through very highly structured step-by-step processes with branches and approval loops and all that. that, and to check to make sure that a zip code has exactly 5 digits in it. We're just fantastic at using technology to do all these things and to make people step through all that stuff in the proper order. And Exhibit A for what happens when you get out of this business and when you stop trying to impose any of this with technology is pretty obviously Wikipedia, right? Where we can state the ground rules of Wikipedia pretty quickly. Want to go over them again? Anyone, with unbelievably few exceptions, anybody can do anything. There's just not a sense of differentiated decision rights or specific roles or workflows or anything. Wikipedia is the largest reference work in a lot of languages around the world. It is about as factually accurate, at least on scientific topics, as the online Encyclopedia Britannica. My favorite part of the story about the study that Nature did, where they compared the factual accuracy of those two online resources, is that Encyclopedia Britannica was a little bit more accurate when they did the study, at least on had fewer minor scientific errors. However, on Wikipedia, all of the errors that were identified were fixed the day after that study appeared. So something interesting is going on here. When you get out of the way and stop doing all that, you unleash some really powerful energy. The reason I tell that story is not just to talk about how great Wikipedia is. Let me ask an incredibly stupid question. How many of us use Wikipedia? I'm serious. Yeah, so we all know that. How many of us have heard of Nupedia? This is a great question for getting the nerds in the room to self-identify. Nupedia was the direct predecessor of Wikipedia. It was founded by the same people, and it had exactly the same goals: to make an online encyclopedia freely available via the web around the world. However, Nupedia did all of these things. There was a 7-step workflow for an article going through the Nupedia process. You submitted a copy. There was an editor who typically had a PhD in the relevant field who looked at it and marked it up and gave it back to you. You had the right to make some edits to it. It went to a copy editor. To even submit an article, you had to be credentialed somehow. You had to be a proper person to do that. I heard Jimmy Wales, who was the founder of both Nupedia and Wikipedia, talk about this, and he said he almost completed a PhD in finance. He's not a dumb person, not a shy retiring person, if any of us have heard him talk. He said, I never submitted an article into the Nupedia process. I was daunted by it, by this thing that I'd created. Somewhere around 25 articles made it all the way through that Nupedia editing process. And in January of 2001, he and Larry Sanger heard about this wiki technology. And they set one up in a corner of the Nupedia environment. They sent out an email to the community. And they said, look, just humor us. This thing might be useful. Go check it out and tell us what you're seeing. They came back a week later. There were 500 articles in process. They came back a month later. There were a couple thousand. The snowball was just rolling downhill. And at some point, they said, we're just going to shut off this Nupedia thing altogether. And Wikipedia is what we have as a result. Let me give you one other example. Again, how many of us have a Delicious account? Yep, not too surprising. So when I first heard about Delicious, I thought it was valuable because it was a place to keep all of your web bookmarks on the web, so that no matter what computer you're sitting in front of, you have access to them. That's great. What I learned, though, is that when I went there, you could type in words that helped you remember why that site was valuable to you in the first place. Anything you wanted. And these are called tags nowadays in Delicious. So this is a snapshot of my Delicious tags at one point in time. The point I want to stress is that I didn't select those tags from any drop-down list or any predefined universe of acceptable words for a web page. It was simply anything that made sense to me at the time. And I'm pretty sure that when I started tagging pages, Enterprise 2.0, I was the first person to do this. I was doing research for the first article that I wrote on it. One thing you notice, to the point about data cleanliness, there's no checking in Delicious. So you notice that I would also tag pages Enterprise 2.0, comma. This is just a screw up on my part, right? You'll see what a slow learner I am. You see I did it twice, not just once. But the point here is that it's letting me do whatever I want. The fact that this goes on doesn't really detract from the value of Delicious for me. I'm tolerant of those kinds of errors. And Delicious tries not to keep me from screwing up front, which I think is a really nice shift in perspective. There was a great quote in the early-ish days of the web where someone said, the web is the world's largest library. The problem is all the books are on the floor. In other words, this massive undifferentiated content. You got to paw through stuff until you find what you're looking for. And search was a vexing, doesn't it seem weird to think that? Search was a vexing problem on the web for quite a while. And a lot of us used to think that if you weren't imposing a lot of structure up front, what you were going to be left with was this mass of undifferentiated content that you had to sift through to find the needles in the haystack. How many of us can find pretty easily what we're looking for on the web? Stupid question number, whatever. Somebody shout out the one-word answer for why.
Google.
What makes Google so good?
It works.
Why does it work? Sir, that's an honest answer, and I appreciate that. Why are Google's results so good? And in particular? And what?
They know what we know.
Based on what?
What you're interacting.
No.
No, what everybody links to.
Ah.
That's what it is. It's what everybody's already pointing to.
It's what everybody's already pointing to. The heart of the Google algorithm, and the reason those guys fly around in a custom-built 757 these days, is they realize that the web actually has an immense amount of structure baked into it. It's not structure that anyone defines up front. The web is the single most decentralized thing on the planet. There's no one riding herd over us. But what the Google founders realize is that as we do our self-interested page building, we are linking to other pages, and that link structure is an amazing resource for stuff to help us find the stuff that we're actually looking for. So the #1 page, if I type in Boston Red Sox, is the page that's most frequently linked to using that phrase. And in particular, if pages themselves are heavily linked to, then they get more of a vote in the final ranking. And Google realized that this structure is just incredibly rich, and it gets better as we add more and more stuff to the web. The last thing about the link structure that's so great is that when I link to something on my blog, I don't do it for the good of the web. It's purely a self-interested activity. I think it's going to make my blog more valuable for my readers. As a result of that selfish activity, though, there's a huge group-level benefit that arises at the web level. And Google realized that that's a nice property of linking. There are a bunch of other ways to take advantage of that. This is a tag cloud snapshot at one point in time in Delicious. And again, I tag websites because that helps me remember what they're about. I don't do it for the good of the web. As a result of that autonomous activity, though, me and all the other Delicious users tend to type in kind of the same words over time. So that's a list of the most popular Delicious tags. Size of the font indicates the relative popularity. Red indicates tags that I used. And I want to point out again that this is not perfect. You'll see both blog and blogs as popular Delicious tags. I'm pretty sure that we didn't mean two different things with those two different tags. So what? Makes it a little bit more cumbersome to navigate around. Big deal, we can handle that. And Delicious provides a wonderful complementary way to navigate through content. Because if you click on any of those, you'll see the sites that have been tagged with that word. If the Delicious members let us, we can also see who they are that was doing that tagging, other sites that they've tagged, related tags to that tag, and all kinds of great ways to branch through and navigate the web. So the phenomenon again here is the emergence of structure over time, as opposed to the imposition of structure up front. Thomas van der Waal has a great phrase for this. He calls this a folksonomy system, which is a categorization system developed over time by folks, as opposed to a categorization system developed at one point in time by an expert. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Here's an alternative. It's the ongoing dynamic folksonomy of what's happening on the web. One more example. Flickr is a photo sharing, uploading, and sharing service. One of the nice things about Flickr is that if you upload a photo, I can tag it. So you have this nice kind of everybody piling on and adding tags. As a result, different pictures tend to have a large number of tags associated with them. Flickr realized this, and they applied some pretty straightforward clustering algorithms in the background to say, okay, associated with tag A, how many different clusters of photos are associated with that tag? And what they're not doing is trying to digitally analyze the contents of the photograph itself. All they're doing is analyzing the constellation of tags associated with different photos. So I typed in Boston a while back into Flickr to see what clusters resulted. The first one is an architecture cluster, and you see the tags associated with that in addition to Boston, tend to be Massachusetts building, Cambridge, things like that. The second tag is a Boston Red Sox cluster. You know, if you spend any time in Boston, you know that it's Red Sox Nation, and we're incredibly passionate about that. So the tags, in addition to Boston, that you see there are things like Fenway, Red Sox, Yankees suck, things like that. This crossed the line from good idea into genius to me when I started to look at the next couple clusters here. If you're tagging a photo Boston, there's a decent chance it's a picture of your Boston Terrier. So there's an entire Flickr cluster here that has words like terrier, dog, Boston Terrier, in addition to that tag Boston. If you look, those actually are all pictures of Boston Terriers. And then finally, there's a really good chance that if you tagged a photo Boston, you've just taken a picture of why people live in California as opposed to New England. Here's the lousy winter weather cluster in Flickr. Snow, blizzard, tree, get me the hell out of here, all kinds of tags like that. So you can do all kinds of interesting work with a little bit of algorithmic knowledge in the background to further harvest the structure that we see from this very autonomous, entirely emergent, undirected activity of tagging. As I said earlier, the most common question that I get asked from the executives that I try to talk to about on this topic is, great, what are the business benefits of doing that? Let's say we buy all of the previous. So what? How is this useful inside my organization? And to answer that question, I draw a bullseye picture for people where I say, take a prototypical or a focal knowledge worker inside your organization, and let's draw a picture of what her world looks like. At the middle of that bullseye, there's going to be a relatively small number of people with whom she has strong ties, which are exactly what they sound like. They're ties that are built up over long periods of deep interaction. They're your coworkers, the people you have lunch with most days, the people who sit 2 seats over from you, and you tend to work very deeply with them for a long period of time. As a result, you tend to know a lot of what they know, and they know a lot of what you know. At the second level, there's a much larger group of people inside your organization, and certainly outside, with whom you have weak ties. You worked with them a while back, you met them at a conference, you ran across them one place or another. In 1973, the sociologist Mark Granovetter, who's now out here at Stanford, one of these landmark papers in the discipline called The Strength of Weak Ties, where he made the point that we spend a lot of time trying to strengthen already strong ties. Think about the things that we do to further deepen our interactions with the coworkers we already know fairly well. We have offsites, we design offices in one way or another. Granovetter's point was that we really should be spending a lot of time at this ring of the bullseye on weak ties, because weak ties are where your non-redundant information comes from. They're where novelty really comes in. They provide bridges to other networks. And he said weak ties are actually going to be our primary sources of innovation for a lot of knowledge workers. There's been a mound of research based on that theory in the years since. It really bears out his arguments bizarrely well. For example, most people's next job comes via a weak tie, not a strong tie. A colleague of mine named Morton Hansen did some wonderful research where he looked at the productivity of work teams inside a great big organization. He found that teams that had a greater number of weak ties, or a proportionally greater number of weak ties, got more innovative work done more quickly than those that only had strong ties. So weak ties appear to be extremely strong. What are our mechanisms for exploiting them and keeping them healthy inside companies right now? I think we have very few of them, especially when you compare them to all the things we do to try to keep strong ties already strong. We kind of have internal knowledge fests and days and conferences, but when I look around at how I stayed up with a network of weak ties, lousy mechanisms for that. In addition, there are also, to my mind, these days, lousy mechanisms for finding potential ties. And for our focal knowledge worker, those are simply people who would be useful to her if only she knew about them. There's probably a big population of those people in any sizable organization. They could keep her from reinventing the wheel. They could give her an answer to a question that's very important to her, and just help her be both a lot more innovative and a lot more productive if only she knew of their existence. And kind of pinging your organization to find those people today is a really tough challenge. You can search directories. That tends not to be very useful. The stuff that's in those directories doesn't really reflect what people do and what they know. So the question of how do we turn potential ties into actual ones It's a pretty deep question for a lot of organizations. And then finally, at that last ring of the bullseye, let's be frank, there are a bunch of people for our focal knowledge worker who, even if she knew about them, just flat wouldn't be that useful. They just don't have a lot to say to each other. And I initially thought there's no technology that would be useful at this final ring of the bullseye. I don't think that anymore, and I'll talk about that in a second. If we rebuild this bullseye, I can identify a prototypical Enterprise 2.0 technology that's valuable at each ring here. For example, at that innermost ring of strong ties, my prototypical tool here is just a wiki, one of these online whiteboards that everyone has equal access to. Right now, the primary mode of collaboration for strongly tied people is emailing stuff around and attaching documents to it. How many of us do a lot of that? Leave your hand in the air if you're thrilled with how well that works, please. Right, this is just a broken way of interacting. Most of us are pretty unhappy with it, but it's the dominant mode of getting stuff done. And you always have to worry about version control and synchronizing stuff. We can just do a lot better with online platforms where the content is always up to date. One point I do want to make, though, is that these tools are not just valuable at the ring of the bullseye where I'm going to talk about them. Let me try to make that concrete. I was at the CIA headquarters a while back, and there's a lot of stuff on Intellipedia that they clearly can't show me because I don't have the clearance for it. They have an unclassified version of the network, and one of the pages they could show me was the Intellipedia page that got generated when the Yankee pitcher Corey Lytle flew his plane into the building in Manhattan in 2004, 2005. Remember, when that first happened, there was a huge amount of uncertainty about what was going on, and a lot of us thought there was another terrorist attack taking place in New York. As soon as that happened, someone built an Intellipedia page with just the title, Plane Crash in New York, a couple sentences, anybody know what's going on? Now, all members of the intelligence community across 16 different agencies have access to that. And what my hosts were able to show me is the different versions of that page, where you watched people chime in and say, I'm watching CNN, they say it's a small plane, not a big one. I grab the registration for that plane, something that we can actually do inside the intelligence community. I looked it up, it happens to be a flight instructor who's based out of New York. This doesn't sound like a terrorist thing to me. You could watch the successive versions of that page, and within a matter of minutes, hours if not minutes, the intelligence community had convinced itself that this was a terrible accident, a tragedy, but it was not a question of national security. It was nothing that they needed to spend their time on. So they moved on from there. At that second level of a weakly tied network, the technology that I feel does a great job of helping me keep on top of my network of weak ties is just Facebook. I think it's an unparalleled mechanism for keeping on top of a network, very far-flung network of people, most of whom I actually don't know very well. My Facebook friends are not my strongly tied colleagues or my personal friends. They're people I meet at events like this. Facebook has this great scrolling list of stuff that your network is doing. And again, it's whatever they feel like telling the rest of the world about. Here's what I'm up to. Here's a blog post. I uploaded some pictures. Here's a website that I think is cool. Here's an event that I think worthwhile, but it's a great way for you to stay on top of what this network is doing. It's also a really nice tool, and I think it's going to become a better tool for exploiting that network. You can ask your Facebook network a question, and if anyone's got a few spare cycles, they can shoot back an answer to you. Great way to ping this network of weak ties. And when I think about previous technologies for doing that, I kind of come up short. I don't think there are great ones out there for that. At the third level of potential ties, my prototypical technology here is a healthy internal corporate blogosphere where different people in groups and labs and whatnot are narrating their work, is the great phrase that I heard. They're just talking about what they're up to. Here's what I did, here's what I saw, here's a problem that I'm wrestling with. If you combine that with decent search, you suddenly have a great tool for finding potential ties, people who would be valuable to you. Before I went to CIA, one of my hosts asked for a list of questions that I was interested in. And one of my questions was, what's the benefit to you all of doing this, of Intellipedia and the other 2.0 tools? My host put it up on his internal blog, and I got to look at the answers to that question. The single most common response I got back was, I found a colleague halfway around the world in a very different part of the intelligence community who's incredibly valuable to me. They're interested in exactly the same things I am. I never would have known about them otherwise. These are 16 agencies, each of them deeply bureaucratic with its own history, and there's just not a great way to have any meaningful interactions at the level of the overall community. The internal blogosphere and the tools they have are great ways to figure out who else is interested in the Taliban's poppy cultivation this year. These people are going to be strewn all over the agency. They suddenly have a great way to find each other. And whether or not they're using these tools to collectively generate their content, that's one goal. They certainly have a better Rolodex as a result of people they can call up to ask questions and help each other. Let me try to make that concrete. InfraWest is a great example for me of this because they are not a 2.0 company at all. They're not where we'd expect to see this kind of energy take place. They build resorts in the western part of North America, Canada and the US. They build ski resorts, basically. For some reason, their leadership determined that blogging would be a good tool. And what you see here is an employee blog inside the firewall at InfraWest, where in 4 paragraphs and 3 pictures, this person is telling all of his colleagues that he found a way to save $500,000 when laying down one of these huge radiant floors in the lobby of a resort. And he said, hey, I just figured out something else to do. You laid the cement differently, you sanded differently, and as a result, I got a $500,000 cheaper budget than I would have had before. That's great. What you see here at the bottom is a comment to that guy's blog from one of his colleagues saying, this is interesting, do you have any more photos, and can you tell me exactly how you sanded the corners to get the finish right? Now, what we might be witnessing there is $500,000 in savings transmitting itself throughout the organization. And when I get asked questions about the ROI of Enterprise 2.0, this is always Exhibit A for me. I guarantee that blogging platform did not cost anywhere near $500,000 to roll out inside this organization. But the options you're opening up can be incredibly valuable. I'll give you one more quick example. Avenue A Razorfish is a digital design consulting ad agency recently acquired by Microsoft, about 1,000 people in 12 offices, and this is their intranet. Because it's such a geek-heavy company, their intranet uses MediaWiki software. They're all pretty comfortable with this. But it's got a few interesting sections. There's the blog roll. These are new pages in their wiki, recently uploaded documents, the internal tag cloud, and then this last box is really interesting. These are news stories in Dig, bookmarks in Delicious, and photos in Flickr out there on the big, broad internet that some Avenue A Razorfish employee has tagged with the tag AARF. Their servers back at headquarters scan Dig, Delicious, and Flickr. Whenever they see that tag, they pull it in and display it right in this box on the intranet. So this is a tool by which employees can tell their colleagues, hey, there's something going on out there on the internet that I think we all should know about, and they suck it in that way. When I blogged about this, there were a couple of comments back saying, wow, this seems like a pretty stupid idea because all of Avenue A's competitors now know the stuff that they're interested in. They basically have a window inside the organization. One of the Avenue A employees put another comment up on my blog, and he said, whoa, yeah, we'd hate if our competitors knew that we like Starbucks. He just thought it was a complete non-issue. He said, if you can figure out who our clients are and what we're working on based on the tags that we're putting in here, more power to you. They didn't consider it a big security loss at all. And then finally, at this last level, people who really don't have a lot to say to each other. What technology could possibly be useful here? How many of us have heard of prediction markets? I don't think we need to do too much of a tutorial. Simply an internal stock market. You got a portfolio, you buy and sell securities, but the securities are not tied to the value of a company. They're tied to some other future event. Who's going to win the presidential election? How many units are we going to sell next quarter? Something like that. The benefits of this is that this is what I mean by clear evidence of collective intelligence. It turns out that prediction markets are bizarrely accurate and decisive at predicting the events of very, very vague, very weird, uncertain future things. For example, the University of Iowa has been running a prediction market for national political elections in the States and more recently in other countries since about 1988. In general, this is not an overstatement really at all, That market is closer to the final vote breakdown for US presidential elections than the big, wide, nationwide, very expensive, very professional polls done by Gallup and Reuters and Zogby and people like that at every point in time. 6 months out, more accurate. 3 months out, a week before the election, they're both more accurate. Like you'd imagine, both polls and the market tend to get more accurate as we draw closer to the event. But at every point in time, the market essentially does a better job. It's closer to the final correct answer. The reason I bring this up, any of you heard of the Hollywood Stock Exchange? This is another internet-wide prediction market where you're buying and selling how well you think a Hollywood movie is going to do. No real skin in the game. You play with funny money. This tends to upset economists who don't think you get answers unless you have real skin in the game. But you're playing with funny money here. We had an economist from UCLA come to my academic area at HBS and give a talk about predicting the success of Hollywood movies. His conclusion was pretty straightforward. He said, it's not hard to predict how well a Hollywood movie is going to do. It's impossible. He said, I grabbed data from hundreds of movies. I built the best models I could come up with. I plugged in the star, the director, the budget, the genre, the producers, the advertising budget, you name it. Nothing is a significant predictor when you look across a bunch of movies. He said, it's a crapshoot how well a Hollywood movie is going to open. No one can tell you. Well, maybe, maybe not. Each of these dots is a movie. Along the bottom axis, the people who wrote this paper plotted what the market thought the opening week revenues were going to be prior to the opening of the movie. On the other axis, it plotted how well the movie actually did in its first week. That dotted line is the line of perfection. This ain't bad at all. We're starting to use these things behind the firewall to predict things like next quarter's sales. The conclusions are preliminary, but it again appears that we get bizarrely accurate answers about questions that we care a lot about inside companies as well. And you don't need 80% of the employees as active traders. You get good answers from, to my eyes, a very small group of people who are trading heavily. I want to end on a down note, unfortunately, and talk about the barriers or the challenges to adoption here, because I think they're actually very, very severe. And as I said, a lot of companies, even if they want to harness this energy, are going to have a hard time doing it. And I lay out the adoption challenges on an axis from the more technical to the more organizational. Let me just highlight a couple of them. If we don't make these technologies easy enough and intuitive enough and appealing enough to use, I think they're going to sit on the shelf and gather virtual dust simply because they're up against an incumbent technology for collaboration called email. We all have it. We all use it. We all have our problems with it, but it also has its advantages. And we need to displace the incumbent, at least partially, if the new tools and approaches are going to take hold. The reason this is more difficult than it sounds up front is because of a problem that my colleague John Gorville at Harvard, who's in the marketing department, calls the 9X problem. And he tries to understand why some consumer technologies never take off, even though they're demonstrably better mousetraps. Let me try to make this concrete. Raise your hand, please, if you own a TiVo. And in all seriousness, please keep your hand in the air. Look around the room. In all seriousness, we are the target demographic for TiVo. TiVo wants all of us to have a TiVo. Fair to say that all of us can afford a TiVo in here. Leave your hands in the air, please. Leave your hands in the air if you love your TiVo. Look around the room. Right, put 2 hands in the air if you really love your TiVo. Leave your hands in the air if you have trouble imagining your life before your TiVo came along. Look around. Leave your hands in the air if you evangelize about TiVo to dinner parties with your friends, if you're an unpaid member of the TiVo sales force. Gang, why don't we all have TiVo? This is a question of deep interest to the makers of TiVo, for example. And it's a deep puzzle. This is a better mousetrap. Those of us who have it pity the poor suckers who don't have it. I can't tell you how much I got condescended to before I finally bought a TiVo. Why don't we all have it? Why is it still a niche technology? Gorville's conclusion, I think, is spot on, and it relies on a branch of economic psychology called prospect theory, which a lot of us are probably familiar with. They gave out the Nobel Prize in economics for it a while back. A ton of research supports the fact that we are just weird and biased in our evaluations of things. In particular, if we have an incumbent DVD or email, technology, and we have a prospect, something that's supposed to replace the incumbent or do its job for it, TiVo or Enterprise 2.0. What the makers of the prospect technology hope, because that's a better mousetrap, they hope that all of us users are going to make some kind of rational evaluation of the two, line up the benefits and the drawbacks of each, and if the benefits are bigger over here, we're going to jump ship and go do the prospect technology. What happens instead is a psychological process during which we tend to overweight the relative advantages of our incumbent by about a factor of 3. Tons of lab research bears this out, about a factor of 3. We tend to underweight the relative advantages of the prospect by about a factor of 3. Multiply that together, you got the 9x problem, and it explains this lore in consumer marketing, that what you're rolling out, if you're trying to displace something that's already there, what you're rolling out had better be 10 times better, or it's going to remain a niche technology. As we just saw, TiVo is, I don't know, 8 times better, but it's still a niche technology. Enterprise 2.0, these new tools and approaches, they can be a lot better. They're still going to be a niche technology unless we give it some organizational nudges via changing the incentives, doing a lot of evangelizing, or getting out there and trying to encourage this 1.0 email-based workforce to collaborate in a fairly different way. And I hate the phrase culture as much as any organizational culture as much as anyone, because it's a vague, squishy term. But culture does appear to matter a lot. And either we need to change the culture a little bit, or have an exception carved out, or do some really interesting change management work to try to get people to move away from what they're doing now and start collaborating with each other in some fairly different ways. All the evidence I have shows that this is a fairly long, fairly slow process. Demographics are helping us out. I honestly think there is a Facebook generation that's entering the workforce now, and for them, the incumbent technology is a platform, is a Facebook or is Wikipedia or stuff like that. And email is their grandfather's quaint technology. They literally use it to send thank you notes to their aunt for sending them 20 for their birthday or something like that. So the demographics are going to help us with this, but waiting for 40 years in the death rate to make this transition complete is a long, slow strategy, basically. Let me try to wrap up with just a couple of conclusions here. My strongest professional conviction after studying the impact of technology for over a decade now is that technology is not the great leveler. It does not make organizations and companies more alike. It tends to sharpen differences among them. It tends to separate winners from losers. Enterprise 2.0, all these new tools and approaches are only going to accentuate this trend because they're difficult to do and beneficial. The people who actually succeed at adopting it are going to be pulling away from their competitors who don't. Not immediately by any stretch, but over time, it's going to add up. All of this world is still in flux. We don't have the final stable toolkit yet. I don't know if Facebook for the enterprise is going to be Facebook or is going to be something else, but some social networking tool is really, I can't believe it's not going to enter our workforce. And I think this is a trend that's going to require several years to play out fully. We might be in the peak of the hype cycle now, and I can imagine a crash coming, but there's going to be steady progress in actually deploying new tools and new work approaches for several years to come. Let me stop there, and with the time we have left, I'd love to hear any reactions, questions, comments. Please.
How about the organizational politics within the group, among the business units?
Yeah.
How do you deal with this?
The question's about organizational politics, and any of us who know organizations at all, we should stop kidding ourselves. It's not the case that everyone wants everyone else to collaborate in a fairly free and easy fashion inside companies. Absolutely agree. I asked this question to the people inside the intelligence community, where I have, you can't imagine sharper bureaucratic divisions, more intense turf protection, and just some deeper dysfunctions than take place between the FBI and the CIA and across these 16 different intelligence agencies. And I said to the people who were evangelizing, how are you ever getting any traction here? And they said about 3 things. They said, first of all, we have official support from the top of the organization. After 9/11, there is a Directorate of National Intelligence formed, an umbrella organization over all 16 intelligence agencies in the US. The leaders of that organization have blessed this technology. So there's some level of official cover from the top. They said we have a small core of fairly patient evangelists who at the drop of a hat, they'll go give their dog and pony show to any part of the government, any intelligence agency that asks for it. And they said most fundamentally, there are people inside the intelligence community, inside all these different agencies, who want to catch bad guys more than they want to protect their turf, which I found an incredibly heartening answer. Probably not as many as we'd all like, but there are people who really want to do their job and think that better collaboration tools are going to help them with that. So I look at a combination of official support from the top, good evangelizing, and some bottom-up energy, some pent-up demand as what's going to get us past those kinds of politics. Not in all cases. Politics are incredibly strong. Please.
Why do you think prediction markets haven't really taken off as much as something like a Facebook? Is it too hard to specify the outcomes? Do people not care about markets?
Yes and yes. I think that everyone wants to have friends, right? Not everyone thinks of themselves as a trader. It's actually a fairly small percentage of the population who loves to trade and thinks of themselves as an active trader. In addition to which, the word about prediction markets is just not nearly as well understood as social networking is. Every CIO has a 13-year-old at home who's on Facebook and sees that stuff all the time. I don't think their 13-year-olds are trading in the Hollywood Stock Exchange all the time. So the word is just not nearly as widespread. In addition, a lot of companies, even ones who have deployed this technology, don't quite know what to do with the results. Am I going to fire my existing planning department? Are they all redundant? Who am I going to trust here? To which my response is, yeah. If the answer... When I look around at most planning and forecasting processes inside companies, it's an intensely political bureaucratic process where the number you wind up with is the number that everyone can live with, not the best prediction about how many units you're going to sell next quarter. So my radical proposal is fire those people and just use the market instead, but falls on deaf ears so far.
Matt Doherty, the CEO of Spree.
Oh, hey, Matt.
The prediction market software company.
This is Matt. Nice to meet you finally.
The answer to the prediction markets question is actually very akin to the answer given on kind of organization, bureaucracy, and organizational issues. I mean, think about prediction markets as a manager. It actually exposes your bad decision making. If you're a manager, your life is the hierarchy. The people below you, you don't want to expose their actual better thinking and better predictions of you. Matt's actually done a lot of work in this and realized that managers are actually typically the worst at prediction market outcomes.
And in many cases, the last ones who want the truth to come out. There's a wonderful paper written by a guy named John Sturman at MIT, where he was trying to understand why projects in the auto industry are always, in the US auto industry, always late, over budget, nasty, depressing outcomes. And he was doing a bunch of interviews inside one of the auto companies, and there was a weekly meeting of very senior managers on this new car project, on one of these big 5-year projects to develop a new car. And he was talking to someone about the upcoming meeting, and the guy said, "Oh yeah, you mean the Liars Club?" He said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Yeah, it's the meeting where we all get together and lie to each other about our progress toward our milestones on this project. And we do it because we don't want to be the first one to say, oh yeah, I'm woefully behind on this. And I always think that I can throw more resources and catch up all the ways that I'm behind." And he said the people that rise to the top in this organization are the master players in the Liars Club. And a prediction market is kryptonite for that process, right? It doesn't care about any of these organizational politics, especially if people get to trade anonymously, so they're trading based on their true beliefs. It's spitting out the answer, this project is woefully late. It will not complete on time. Deeply uncomfortable for a lot of management teams. Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Andy, I'm a big fan of yours.
Thank you. These are the kinds of comments that we really want to encourage.
Reasonable, I understand. But I work mainly with corporations on overcoming your challenges. Mm-hmm. And it seemed to me that one thing that is different about these challenges is that consumer software and young people's technical knowledge has lapped the establishment.
Hugely.
And if you have an organization where some of the new hires are using instant messenger to find out things a lot faster than comes down through the hierarchy, aren't some managers going to be not just challenged and say, geez, that's a better way to do business, and start to open it up?
Yes, not all are, but some are. And I really think this is, I hate to overhype these technologies. I don't want to be a professional hype merchant for a living. It makes me really uncomfortable. But I think these technologies actually are going to see where the theory in use lines up with the espoused theory inside organizations. It's a great distinction that Chris Ardress has always drawn about it's very easy to say that people are our most important resource, we want to facilitate collaboration, blah, blah. These technologies really put that theory to the test and and they're going to clarify if the theory in use inside a company lines up with the espoused theory.
It's the bottom-up being adopted.
Yep, and there's a lot of bottom-up energy, but hierarchy is still strong inside companies, and that clash is going to play out differently in every different organization. Please.
I want to compliment you. It's very,
Again, this is exactly correct.
It's very, very rare that you hear a person talk as fast as you do and maintain the quality throughout.
This is usually an hour and a half presentation, so this was a crunk.
Two things that I'd like you to comment on. First, that for managers, the issue of control and the issue of producing value for the customer are opposed.
I'll buy that.
The other thing is, does putting your name on a blog entry tend to quiet down the flames and make the exchange more civil?
Yeah. I think it does overall, because the huge default between the intranet and the internet is that anonymity is the default on the internet and identity is the default on the intranet. And I think that when you have identity as the default, the discourse tends to be a lot more civil, first of all. And I think that that's the good side, because I really hate the flame wars that break out on the internet. The downside, though, is that at least you're getting the straight dope on the internet. And when I've been involved in Wikipedia debates, no one has kid gloves on at all, right? It's all about the correct answer. To the extent that the default is identity on the intranet, we might get away from that a little bit. So I think there's going to be an interesting set of challenges around getting the truth to come out and making people comfortable with giving their true opinions. One of the reasons prediction markets work very well, I think, is that trading is typically anonymous. So if I'm working on this project that's woefully behind, my boss isn't going to know that I'm trading against him.
I'd be interested in particular about your discussion about particular industries. For example, in financial markets, traders, if you wind up using instant messaging to go out and communicate information back and forth, it's even regulated.
Definitely.
So these guys are actually interested in doing this stuff.
Yep.
They're real believers.
Yep.
To the point where, in fact, it can be illegal if you're not careful. So again, which industries do you think are going to be taking this stuff up versus others?
In general, the industries where I see the greatest uptick tend to be ones where human capital is terribly important, and human capital is also terribly mobile. So for example, the high-tech industries are big adopters of these tools, because if I don't like the work environment here, I'm going to go down the street a little bit in Silicon Valley and do it someplace else. And a big part of what makes the work environment good is my ability to express myself and to collaborate the ways I want to. So those organizations are conditioned to accept a lot more individualism, a lot more lateral flows of information. Command and control just doesn't work very well. The further we go toward an old command and control mindset, the more pessimistic I get. But again, I keep on harping on the intelligence community, not because I like hanging out with spies, although I do, but it's because it's this intense, old school, top-down command and control environment where we see this wonderful lateral energy and this bottom-up energy going on. So I don't think, outside of top management really wanting to kill it, which is a great deal killer, I don't know if there are any other deal killers that I'd identify up front, industry or anything else. So, two more questions.
I'm very convinced by your wiki example. Where I still have doubts, though, maybe you could address, is your Google example. I think Google works really well when your information need is sort of finding a home page, lots of WebSockets, when it's finding, but for the long tail of information needs, or for topics where I'm really where I have a recall-based information need, where I'm trying to find 100 examples rather than one example, I found that the harnessing of collective intelligence, at least maybe in the way Google does it, really tails off beyond the result about 6 or 7. And sometimes when I'm searching for digital cameras, I want 50 pages. I click to the 30th page, and the results are all crap.
It turns into junk by that point. Yeah.
And so it seems to me that Google has been unable to meet that sort of information need. is that evidence of a failure of collective intelligence?
Here's something you're not going to hear very often. I don't know. I honestly, search is such a rich topic, and it's not something that I have any deep expertise in, that I can't tell you this approach to search versus that one is going to give better results for different cases. I know how much active research is going on, how much startup energy there is. So at a base level, I'm confident that whatever the enterprise search problem is, we're going to get pretty decent technologies for it. But beyond that kind of bland optimism, I can't give you a lot more good information. Or any good information, actually. Last one, please.
Great talk. One question around your stance on the meaning going forward of the boundary that we see today between inside one corporation and the outside world. And I'll tell you what I mean. A lot of the examples you brought up early on that are success stories, whether you're talking about Delicious, blogging, Wikipedia, I think they draw their strength from the fact that we are here in the public sphere, and critical mass, drivers, motivators to contribute, right? So, and you also mentioned the Facebook generation. If anything defines those guys is their willingness to narrate their own life in the public sphere. And so do we see a clean boundary between intranet and internet going forward, or do we see that go away as a moot distinction?
Neither. I think that boundary is going to get a lot blurrier and a lot lower in some cases, but I don't think it will or should vanish. The barrier of the corporation exists for a good reason in a lot of cases. There's stuff that we don't want to share with the outside world. There's information we don't want to have get out there, flavors of collaboration that need to remain purely internal. We can clearly do that. Like you say, though, a lot of what the Web 2.0 examples tell us is the benefits that come from working in a very public way. One of the interesting things about all these tools is that you can draw the barrier around them wherever you want to. If you want to leave it at the firewall, that's great. If you want to extend these environments out to your value chain partners, that's great. If you want to extend them out to everybody out there on the internet, you can do that too. So wherever we decide to draw the barrier, we can do it. We can also have the barrier at one place for some purposes and then keep it much more tight for other ones. The technologies are pretty good for doing that now, probably only going to get better. So I would not encourage companies to only focus on what's going on behind the firewall. But by the same token, I don't like this, the 2.0 zealot approach of everything must be public and transparent to the whole world. It's just not how companies work or should work. We need to stop? Fantastic. Thank you very much.